I hear Bishop voices?
So, Chris, meet David, and Irene Brownlee. Hello, Chris.
It's one of the groups that started Bishop Voices.
Start with.
In the Methodist Church, it's Missional Wisdom.
Oh, Missional Wisdom.
Missional Wisdom. But I think similar.
I thought it was Bishop Voices. I was like, who's that?
This one started by Lane Heath. Ran first time. He's at the end of
I got really excited because I could mention you over there.
I didn't see it. We just had a national conference in Dallas this last weekend.
Yeah, we had our national gathering in Indianapolis, and I was there.
Can I sit in here with you? Before you get all fancy on me?
Oh, it's already live. So. That means you have to ask questions.
The vitalization of the church is good for
yes. That's why we started the organization.
There was a national program that you all did like 4 or 5 years ago.
We only started 3 years ago, 4 years ago.
Now, what's it called?
Missional Voices.
How can I read about it?
You can go to missionalvoices.com or .org. It all goes back to it.
That website.
Yeah. I'm going to be rebuilding it this next month.
Oh, you're doing it?
Yeah, it was part of the first one. I'm in charge of all technology. I'm in charge of all of our technology, so all of our live streaming.
Good.
Oh. Anything there's my card.
Thank you.
Welcome everybody. Hi David. This will be recorded audio as well. Her plane got in too late. From Jerusalem. She's flying back from Jerusalem. Like your haircut? Are you ready, Jody, for tomorrow? Hello, Devin Doyle. Good.
You know, it's something new. When you come that, you can
Yeah.
Sandy Skirving just passed
I don't think it's up right now. There's too many people on it. It crashed, so I couldn't get it to come out. And it doesn't really work in the sanctuary anyway, so.
All right, I got 3 questions.
I think they're in the basket.
Yeah.
So they went for live?
These mics weren't working very well.
I told you. Yeah. Say hello. There we go. There we go.
You get the signal this time to start.
And we are honored tonight for all of you to be present as we gather the three diocesan bishops of the state of North Carolina for our program this evening. I'd like to begin by saying a prayer, and then we'll turn it over to Jay Seiboff, who will be our moderator for the evening. Let us pray. Gracious Father, we pray for this, your church. We ask you to be with those gathered this evening as we come to know you more perfectly through your Son, Jesus Christ our Lord. Bless the bishops gathered, the clergy, the lay leaders, and the congregations committed to the Easter resurrection. Help us in all that we do and in all that we say to be witnesses of your love to our broken world. Through Jesus Christ our Lord we pray. Amen.
Good evening. My name is Jay Seiboff, and I serve on the clergy staff here at St. James, and it's such a privilege to welcome you to St. James this evening and to welcome the bishops here to have a conversation. It's just a great joy. I've been a priest for about 30 years. This is kind of an unusual event to have this many bishops in one place actually in conversation with each other. I'm just saying. So anyway, I just think it's great. Hey Sam, can I tell a story how this started? Sure. Because actually I can, even if you say no. So Sam and I have known each other for a bit of time, and I called him, and the lecture committee said we really would love to have Sam come talk, and I said, call Sam and see if he'd come talk. And Sam said, yes, I'll come talk. And then the next day he called and said, you know what would be better is if we got the bishops of North Carolina together. And I said, Sam, you can do that? You're as good a bishop as I've met. And lo and behold, then we found this date when these bishops could come together. And I'm just so grateful to each of you, because I think one of the challenges of our church is that we work in silos, and one of the graces that I see in these bishops is their interest in working together for the good of the wider church, and especially for the good of our glorious state. And so I'm really grateful to you for being here. Let me introduce them to you without taking too much time, because I really want to give them the most airtime that we can this evening. José McLoughlin was consecrated as the, everybody know Jose? This is Jose. Consecrated as 7th Bishop of the Diocese of Western North Carolina in 2016. He worked as a canon to the ordinary and chief of staff in the Diocese of Oklahoma for a while. Served congregations in Southeast Florida and Virginia. This is really key. Before he was ordained, he worked in the criminal justice field, serving in Florida as a police officer and then in the U.S. Department of Justice in Washington. Jose was born in San Juan, is bilingual, enjoys music, playing the drums, and studying 18th century American history. He and his wife, Laurel, have 2 children, Alexander and Allison, so we're so glad to have Jose with us. Next to him is Sam Rodman, who is, Sam in the middle. Sam was ordained and consecrated as the 12th Bishop of the Episcopal Diocese of North Carolina in 2017. Before that, he served in the Diocese of Massachusetts and then spent 16 years as rector of St. Michael's in Milton, Massachusetts, a graduate of Bates College and Virginia Theological Seminary. He and his wife, Debbie, where's Debbie? Where are you, Debbie? Debbie. You're hiding. Oh my gosh. I'm saying Debbie a front row seat. So Debbie's in the back, are now living in Raleigh, and they have 2 young adult daughters. And I just, point of personal privilege, I was married here in 1985, and Sam was one of my groomsmen in that wedding. So it's so fun. I think that's the last time you were here. There you go. Anyway, so he's back. He's back. And then our own Rob Skirving was ordained and consecrated as the 8th Bishop of East Carolina in 2014. Born in Windsor, Ontario, studied at the University of Waterloo, Ontario, an MDiv from Huron University, worked in small congregations in rural Ontario, became rector of St. Mark's Anglican Church in Brantford, Ontario, then went to Michigan and figured out that there is actually, in the Western Hemisphere, there is actually warmer weather until made his way, thanks be to God, to the Diocese of East Carolina. And he and his wife Sandy, who I think is probably sitting with Debbie in the back. You're really good about that front row thing. I love that. Have two grown children, Kate and Matt. As advertised, we were going to have the 4 bishops of North Carolina, and we are missing this evening Ann Hodges-Copple. And let me tell you why we are missing her, and we are missing her. Anne was on a pilgrimage in the Holy Land, which was to return on Friday or Saturday? Saturday, and on the flight back, one of the members of the pilgrimage was taken quite ill, and they had to have an emergency landing, and landed in Frankfurt. And Anne, who's a remarkable person and a really remarkable bishop, did what a remarkable bishop would do, which is to stay with that person in Germany until family members could come and join that person. And so while we miss her terribly here in this conversation and give thanks for her remarkable ministry, which is remarkable, we also realize she is doing exactly what a bishop should be doing. And so we join this evening with prayers for her and her travel as she's coming back in the next bit of time, and also for her fellow pilgrim who is in need of God's healing power. So I trust you will all understand that the best intentions, life happens instead of what you plan. And our best intentions for this evening was to have Anne here, but she's not able to be with us, so we'll let the 3 bishops speak about signs of hope. So we thought, what should we talk about with the bishops? And you know, there's a whole lot of gloom and doom about organized religion and mainline tradition and all that kind of stuff going on in our culture. But there's so much to be hopeful about, particularly in this Easter season. And so I'm going to shut up, and I'm going to turn it over to Jose, and then Sam, and then to Rob, and each are going to talk a little bit about where they see signs of hope. Then I'm going to let them react to what each other has said, and then we're going to have some questions, although I wish we had more time than we do, but we'll have some questions from the crowd about their own ministry and vision. But I just want to thank, first of all, the people who put together the really wonderful reception before this, and I want to thank you for coming out on a rainy night and for attending to these wonderful. Yesterday was Good Shepherd Sunday. We got some good shepherds. We got good shepherds. So pay attention to what they have to say. Jose, you're on now.
Good evening. It's good to be with you. Actually, I've been here before as well. I interviewed to be an assistant here out of seminary, and I was offered the position. And I wanted to take it, but the Bishop of Virginia would not let me take it. He wanted me to remain in the Diocese of Virginia. But my wife and I have very fond memories of this place and our weekend spent here and just the amazing hospitality of this congregation and of Father Ron. Everybody was tremendous, and we fell in love with this congregation. So it's kind of weird to be back for the first time as a bishop, which, quite frankly, is living proof that God does, in fact, have a sense of humor. One of the things I wanted to share with you when we talked about, I think Jay had mentioned about what he's seen between the 3 of us as bishops. This is not something I meant to say or talk about, but it did resonate, which is, I think one of the signs of hope is the House of Bishops now. I'm only in this 15 months, but all of us have heard the stories of what it used to be like, of how the bishops used to sit in order of seniority from front to back, and the newest bishop sat at the very back, and there were very strict rules about you don't talk at a certain time, and pay your dues, and then you can get up and talk, and this sort of real interesting culture, and there was no dialogue. Everybody was facing forward. And this change, and actually, you've all heard it too, the stories of, there were literally at times where bishops challenged each other physically on the floor over matters. It was a toxic situation. And so what's wonderful is that the environment has changed. And I believe it started with Bishop Catherine, who really made an intentionality of making sure that the tables we now sit at are round. And we don't get to choose where we sit. The presiding bishop decides where we sit, and it's done intentionally so that the presiding bishop can make sure that those of us sitting at the tables represent a variety of perspectives, of backgrounds, theological perspectives, political understandings, etc. And it's a very different place. And I will tell you, in my time there, I've never felt like I wasn't an equal. I've never felt like I didn't have an opportunity to speak. And I think that's a tremendous sign of hope. And as you watch or as you listen to things that are happening in the House of Bishops, and as we experience it, we're seeing dialogue that I never thought was possible. People in the same room who disagree on issues, have different understandings, but yet in love and in prayer come together and honor and respect each other and then find a way forward. And so I think that is a tremendous sign of hope for the church. And I actually enjoy the House of Bishops. I like being there. I like hearing from my sisters and brother bishops and the things that are doing. And I always come away inspired, refreshed, and renewed in my ministry. And so that's one thing that you need to know that you may not always see, but it does make a difference. And when the bishops are getting fed, and there is this way of being with each other, it does make its way in the diocese. So, and I'm especially grateful to my brother Sam and my brother Rob and my sister Ann. We have had a great relationship. I've said we're lucky in North Carolina because we actually communicate on a regular basis and work together. And that's been a big difference as we try to figure out the things that we're called to do and how we continue to work together. So I'm grateful for them as well. I'm just going to do three things that really, when this question was posed, there were three things that immediately came to mind about signs of hope. Some of this is fed from my perspective as a bishop in the Diocese of Western North Carolina. But some of it is also from my life in the church when I first started, influenced when I was a youth minister before I ever went to seminary. During my time in the Justice Department, I needed a reality check. And so I became very involved in youth ministry. And so my wife and I did a lot of work with youth. So I've been working with youth and young people for about 22 years, at least. And so the first one that came to mind was about youth and young adults. And the sign of hope that I've seen is I have now seen more and more our youth and young adults actually coming to the table, actually stepping up, actually showing the rest of us what matters and what's important. Creating opportunities, coming into communities and bringing an incredible sense of energy and vision to be church in different ways. One of the things that I've worked really hard to do as bishop is to make sure that we are incorporating our youth in all facets of our diocesan life. And that's a youth council that is actually directing the programming, who actually gives me advice on what to do with young people, putting them on positions in committees and commissions in the diocese, putting them at the table to make decisions. We don't have a kids' table in Western North Carolina. And so one of the things, because we've just given them the opportunity to be at the table, what they're bringing is unbelievable. A new way of looking, of thinking that church and mission is not about a building. It's around need, it's around community, it's around a purpose, once again, of our common call, our common sense. And I also credit our presiding bishop, who has really, what I say, brought us back to the basics. Brought us back to where this is. It's all rooted in Jesus Christ. And I think our young people get that a lot more than a lot of us do. I think they have much more of a personal connection right now in their own faith and what that means than I remember when I was growing up. And I grew up in a Roman Catholic family with a lot of Roman Catholics. And it was a wonderful experience. And I went to Catholic school. But I just don't remember the kind of energy and involvement or the kind of passion to serve. And if you talk to young people today, my son is 19, he's a sophomore in college, and my daughter's a junior in high school. They're only interested about what is the church community doing for the community. That's their motivation. And I've seen more young people say, you know, if the church is just going to sit and look insular, we're not interested in joining. We don't want to be a part of that. And the churches that are thriving, the churches that are doing well, are the churches that are acknowledging that and saying, go nuts, go loose. Show us the way. So I have tremendous optimism when it comes to our young people and our young adults. The question is, how are we to respond? Are we willing to go out of our comfort zones? Are we willing to look at things differently? Are we willing to give the keys over and say, go for it? Because, you know, like I said, when you ask them what they want, you better be ready for the answer, and you better be ready to deliver. And so it's just as creative as we can be. And I'll tell you, one of the most exciting things I just saw is we had a group of young adults that came together and came up with an idea of how to get other young adults involved in our diocese. And they wrote a grant, and it just got funded. And they're going to do, because of the beauty of Western North Carolina with all the mountains, they're going to do a wilderness ministry with young adults. Literally taking young adults into the trails and camping. That's their church. That's their cathedral. And it's incredible what they've put together. Mission Eucharist, all trail Eucharist, all these wonderful things. And that all came by a group of young people who came forward and said, we have an idea. And then the other one I'll tell you that is in serious need, but I also have signs of hope, comes in the area of our campus ministry. The old models have got to go. The old models of saying that, hey, you only have a part-time job, right? Well, what if we paid you part-time to come and work at the campus too? Folks, that doesn't work. And so if we're serious about two, we need to invest back in our campus ministries. And it's the people on the campuses that are telling us what their faith journey is and what it would be like if we supported them. So I think another area of hope is I've seen a lot more of a revival, if you will, in our campus ministries. And so at App State and UNCA in Western Carolina, we are turning everything completely upside down because the young people are telling us it doesn't work. So again, another example where it's the young people that are driving this. The second area, and you should know, as I told you, I spent a lot of time in the bureaucracy of Washington. Thanks be to God, we are seeing an absolute decline in the sense of institutionalism in the church. In my opinion, the days of running everything by living by these canons so strictly and worrying about what's going on at the bishop's office and simply saying, you know what, my job as a bishop is to get rid of the crud, to put more resources back out. And I think we don't quite realize the power that we have as bishops to get rid of what I would call bureaucracy. Too many decision points at the diocesan level, too many committees and commissions. I've probably deleted half of them in the diocese. We're rewriting our constitution and canons. We're changing our leadership structure. We're doing it all because it just doesn't work. If we want to be nimble and respond to mission, we need to change the way we make decisions. And it doesn't need to be about a group of people in a diocesan office. I'm not the diocese. They're not the diocese. You're the diocese. And so we have to equip ourselves better to understand that there's probably no program we can create that'll solve everything. It's a matter of standing up from where you are and going out into the community. And my job as bishop and as the diocese is to find a way to cut through all the nonsense so we can put more money back into our congregations, more money back into campus ministry. And please, I'm sorry, again, I don't like meetings. And when we have a meeting, let's have an agenda, and if we don't have an agenda, let's not have a meeting. But it should not take a diocese 4 months to make a decision on something. It just shouldn't. And so I think we underestimate the power when bishops don't understand that if we kind of reorganize how we're managed and how we run, the difference and the impact that can make. And so I think more and more people are responsive to the fact that they get it's not about the institution, it's about Jesus Christ and it's about our mission. And so I do believe that as a diocese and as a bishop, one of the greatest things we can do is to find easier ways to get those resources back out and to cut all the bureaucracy and decision making. When I walked in the door of Western North Carolina, I think we had 29 committees and commissions. We have 10 now. The funny part is of those 19, none of them knew they actually served on that committee and commission until I called them and said, what do you do? They said, I didn't even know I was on the committee. So there was no big uprising. Nobody was at the diocesan office saying, we want more committees. So that's something that I feel is very healthy. And I think it has a lot to do with, again, our presiding bishop. Setting the tone. It's about engaging our communities. It's about seeing God's work about in the world and trying to find ways to continue to engage it and go beyond ourselves. And I think that's catching on. And Don't get me wrong. Look, I was a good Roman Catholic boy and altar boy. I believe in the Episcopal Church. I believe in organized religion. I believe in this denomination. I think the Episcopal Church is an incredible church. I'm just simply saying we can do it better and differently. And so the days of having to say we have to do it this way or canons have to look this way, or I think it's nonsense. And I think the more we're willing to kind of just let that go. So don't get me wrong when I say that. I do believe in our structure and in the church. It just doesn't have to drive everything we do. And then the last one that also came to mind was the one about what I've discovered in Western North Carolina. And that is the DNA that I have found in the churches in Western North Carolina is all about positioning outward. I have encountered more and more congregations who are more concerned about what's going on outside their door than they are inside the church. And I've found more churches throughout Western North Carolina that may have 20 on a Sunday, but they are the feeding program in that community. Or they are the after-school program in that community. They have figured out that their mission is not what happens inside the building. They understand that they come together in worship to be fed, to be nourished in word and sacrament. But the power is when you get up, refreshed and renewed by that, to go out and serve. And so I'm seeing that more and more where actually churches are saying, Bishop, how can we create partnerships within our community? How can we find ways to partner and use what we have to do more? Sadly, in Western North Carolina, we still have probably the 5 highest counties that have child poverty in the state of North Carolina. And food scarcity for us is a real issue in Western North Carolina, even amidst all the wealth that spends their summers in Western North Carolina. And so we have a lot more churches that are stepping up and having these creative partnerships. And I've said this, and it's controversial, but I will not plant a church in Western North Carolina while I'm bishop. We don't need more churches. Western North Carolina, because of its geography, because you couldn't get from one side of the mountain to the other, had towns with 4 churches in it. And part of our dark history is the fact that we had a black church and a white church. We don't need more buildings. We need to understand that the community has changed. And I think what we need to do, and what a lot of these churches are figuring out, is just because you have the building, it's not a bad thing. What it is finding a new way. And we've discovered that we've got a lot of church property that is in the prime heart of need. So what I've said to churches is we're not going to plant new ones, we're going to re-envision. And so a church that is in the middle of Asheville, that is debt-free, that's living in a community with some of the highest homelessness, we can partner with the city and with other organizations, and we can create affordable housing on our property. We can take churches that we have and we can build day centers to give relief to people who need to get off the street. That's where our future is, and that's where the church needs to go, not planting churches. And so what's wonderful is that people are understanding and realizing that instead of looking at their building and saying, what do we do with this? They say, oh, Bishop, imagine right over there, 12 units of housing. That's exciting. And that's where we need to go. And so to me, that really excites me when I see congregations more and more realizing that that's their call. So that's where I want to be in the business of. I want to be in the business of saying that mission is what drives us. And that we have a wonderful worship community that comes together and grows together in their faith, and we have solid Christian education and formation, but we stop obsessing about our budgets and our endowments and our buildings. I never ask a priest on a visitation what your average Sunday attendance is. I don't ask a priest what your average pledge is. I can read, I can look it up, and quite frankly, people, I really don't care. My question is, are you being spiritually fed? Are you growing in your faith? Are you being loved to the point that you can't help but get up off your pew and walk out that door and do something to change the life of somebody in your community? That's what I want to ask, and that's what I do ask. And so the blessing of being a bishop is that I don't have to check with anybody for that. I just give them permission. And in my office, I have a big box of green light bulbs. And whenever someone comes to me with a kooky, wacky idea, I just smile and hand them a green light bulb. and say, go. So thanks be to God that people are changing the way in which they're envisioning their ministry and engaging the community. That's what I got.
I stop and green light bulbs. Good. Sam.
Thanks, Jay. Thanks, Ron. Thank you all at St. James for hosting us. And I'm a new bishop, relatively, been here 10 months in North Carolina. And I'm actually going to take the question that we were asked literally for a minute. Where do you see signs of hope? And I want to tell you a story. I've been driving around now for about 10 months, as I said, in North Carolina, and covered about 18,000 miles in my diocese, which is the middle. We're sort of, Jose's in the west, I'm in the middle, Rob's in the east. And in those 18,000 miles, I've been doing an informal poll, and I've been looking at the road signs and the different signs in the different towns, and I've kind of tabulated, it's not a scientific survey, but I've kind of tabulated what the most common street names in the different towns are. Do you know what number 2 is in my observation? No? New Hope Church Road. New Hope Church Road. Look for it the next time you're driving around. There's one in every town. I don't think it's a coincidence. I think it's a gift. I think it's part of what we're being drawn to. So it's in that context that I want to offer some observations, and you'll hear some recurring themes, and we'll also build off of each other because we are all working for the same purpose, for the same Lord, for the same mission. But one of the things that we are focused on in the Diocese of North Carolina actually connects with the number 1 street name, and of course I should have said not including Elm and Maine, but so number 2 was New Hope Church Road. Do you know what number 1 is? Martin Luther King. I heard it. Yep, Martin Luther King Jr. Exactly. And as you know, Martin Luther King, one of his concepts was beloved community. That is not a theme that's unique to our diocese. It's actually a theme our presiding bishop has lifted up for all of us to consider, but it's become an important touchstone for our work together in the Diocese of North Carolina. It's about understanding and paying attention to our history around race in this country and understanding the history of race. It's also about racial reconciliation. And it's also about differences generally and how we navigate and manage those. And historically, the church, I believe, is uniquely positioned to help us in this country to cross the aisle. And we use that term in politics all the time, but I want to tell you another story about the aisle that I'm standing in right now. Way back when, over 30 years ago, when I was at Virginia Seminary, one of my classmates, Randy Trago, preached a sermon. And at that time, the division in the community was not about race, it was about gender, and it was about language in the liturgy and how we use gender in the language for humans and also for the Godhead. And Randy was talking about that conflict and the tension, and he said, sometimes I feel like there's a wall right down the middle of this community. And as he gestured, he was figuratively pointing to the aisle. And then at the very end of his sermon, he said something I've never forgotten. The resurrected Christ had the power to pass through walls. And then later in the service, when we passed the peace, that's exactly what happened. We passed through the wall that was right in the middle of the community. And when we came up for communion, we did it again. Now, that's not to say that that was the end of the conflict or the resolution. That was 30 years ago, but we're in a different place today than we were 30 years ago. And I think that dynamic that was at the heart of his sermon is at the heart of the church, and it's at the heart of our community. And it's an invitation to us to exercise our leadership in this state, in this country, in the counties where we live, to model what it means to bridge the gaps, to cross the aisle, to listen and learn from those who have a different perspective, a different life experience, a different history, and to recognize all of that is sacred, and all of that is valuable, and all of that has meaning, especially when we share it with each other. So we are actively living into the invitation of becoming beloved community. And we're doing that in a variety of ways in congregations and as a diocese. We are engaging in conversation with those who see things differently. We are looking explicitly and specifically at race and the history around race and how it impacts all of us, but how it disproportionately impacts people of color. And we're trying to understand and come to grips with that and also find a way forward together. And we're doing this in my first year as a bishop, which is a little bit surprising to me. But that's because there was a readiness. We prayed, we listened to the guidance of the Spirit, and there was a clarity as we moved towards our convention that we were ready to do this work. And that in fact, it's time to do this work. And in fact, maybe it's past time to do this work. And it's a blessing and a joy to be engaging in this work together. Another area that we've focused a lot in my short time in North Carolina is what we've called, which is not a perfect term, but we've called vulnerable congregations. And what we mean by vulnerable congregations, the way we define them currently, is congregations who are struggling right now to live into the 21st century and to understand what it means to have a mission and a vocation in this day and age. And it's looking quite different in many respects than traditionally how we understood church and what church looked like. And we're trying to understand together and discover what it might be to step out of the old model and into a new place and a new understanding. And what we recognize is that some of our churches need help in doing that, and they're asking for help. Now, why would this be a sign of hope? Maybe some of you remember the author Walker Percy. Any Walker Percy fans in the crowd? Great. What's up? He wrote a book called Lost in the Cosmos. Not one of his most popular books, but an interesting book. And one of the lines from that book was that a sign of hope is when you recognize that you need help and you ask for it. You recognize you need help and you have the courage to ask for it. We have congregations that are asking for help. And in much the same spirit Jose was describing, my job as a bishop, our job as a diocese, is to provide that help, that resourcing, to come alongside congregations that are looking to discern again, who are we as St. Martin's in the field? What does it mean to live into that identity in this day and age? And what does it mean to look outward and to understand how God is calling us into the community to offer what we can and to listen to what others have to offer? And this engagement and this resourcing needs to look different. Historically, we've sent a consultant. We've sent a member of the diocesan staff. There's nothing wrong with that, but what we've learned over the years is it's not enough. The congregations need more. So we're on the front end of developing a new model, and the Church of the 21st Century is all about exploring new models. Some of them will work, some of them won't. But we're looking at sending a team of people. And it's going to be a team. We have in our staff structure regional canons. So there are 3 of them that are across the diocese. The teams will have a regional canon. They'll have a deacon. They'll have a layperson who has some business experience and some entrepreneurial insight. And they may be active with some discretionary time, or they may be retired. And we have a wealth of retired clergy in our diocese that are looking for opportunities to serve in new ways. And so we're going to be inviting retired clergy to be a part of this team. It's not a perfect formula. It's still in the early stages. But I'm excited about this opportunity to provide a team of people who will come alongside some of our congregations who are looking for guidance and assistance and be with them for 6, 12, or maybe more months as needed in helping them discern their new direction at this time. Many of us as individuals have benefited greatly and deeply from the gift of spiritual direction. Well, sometimes our congregations are looking for spiritual direction, and that's our job. That's what we're here to provide. This is one way that we're looking to explore how to provide that with a new model. A third sign of hope, because we're all Trinitarian and we all think in threes. A third sign of hope is collaboration at the grassroots. There's a lot of collaboration that over the years has been kind of proposed by the diocesan structure. Some of it's worked, some of it hasn't. But the reality is, as we open our eyes and our ears to the way the Holy Spirit is moving around us, the reality is collaboration is bubbling up all over. And we need to pay attention to that, to listen, learn from that, nurture it, and protect it. Some of you probably know the work of the Bishop of Texas, Andy Doyle. I'm reading a book of his right now called Small Batches. I don't know if any of you have read it. But one of the points that's made in the beginning of that book is that it's essential when new ministries, new models, new missional models are emerging, that we protect them as well as nurture them. Because there is some pushback sometimes from the institutional structures. It's not because people are have the wrong intention or that they're just misguided. It's part of our DNA to kind of protect what we know. I'll give you a practical example that this setting reminds me of, because I can see that something similar may have happened here. When I was at St. Michael's Milton, we had hanging lights like this, and they were the only lights in the sanctuary. And more, we were having trouble seeing. But everybody loved the old lights, right? So we didn't want to get rid of the old lights. So what we did is we added lighting in the rafters, which looks like what happened here as well. And I'll never forget when the senior warden announced that on the day that we turned on the lights for the first time. He told the old joke about the Episcopalians and how many does it take to change a light bulb. And all of us love the old one, right? Well, he said, we didn't take away the old, we're just bringing in the new alongside of it. And one of the points that Andy makes in his book is the creative energy that's released when you have the tension of the old run up against the energy from the new is dynamic and it's life-giving. So the point is not to silence the voices of those who have a more traditional perspective. It's to engage with them so that we can be informed by what they're offering and what they're teaching. The collaboration takes many forms, many shapes. It's across congregational, parish lines, but it's also reaching out with social service agencies and local resourcing. It's partnering ecumenically. And there are a couple of examples already that are bubbling up in North Carolina, and these began before I got there as bishop, but I'm paying close attention and nurturing them and walking alongside of them. One is in Galilee. It's called Galilee Ministry in East Charlotte, and it is part of that theme of going out into Galilee, which is a part of the messaging in North Carolina. And it's a closed church. It was St. Andrew's Parish, and the parish closed, and then the building became repurposed as a community center. And it has tremendous outreach to the immigrant community in Charlotte, communities of all faiths, not just of Christian faiths, but of all faiths. And it's doing tremendous work. They're providing tutoring. They're providing community garden. And some of the gardening is being actually led by some of the immigrants who came to Charlotte as gardeners and are sharing their skills and their gifts in terms of what can grow and what can grow well in that kind of environment. There is a food pantry. They're expanding their ministry at this point. They're only 2 years old, but they keep growing. And they're actually running out of space because of all the resourcing that's happening and all the families that are taking advantage of it. More recently, in the North Greensboro area, 4 Episcopal congregations are coming together to share resources. This is not a merger. This is not closing parishes. This is 4 different congregations with their own identity, with their own sense of mission and purpose, and a deep sense that they're being called to work together instead of work separately. And so it's, again, right in the front end of this, but it's tremendously exciting. Last but not least, I mentioned before ecumenical and interfaith. In the same way that we're collaborating as bishops, I think it's also important for us to remember the invitation to collaborate across denominational and even interfaith lines. And just recently, I got a call from the Methodist bishop in North Carolina, and this is part of the complexity, of course, of interfaith and ecumenical work. Everybody divides things differently. So, the bishop the Methodist bishop is kind of, the line is different, and they have many more congregations than we do. I think 300 congregations. But the Methodist bishop, whose name, by the way, is Hope, just saying, Hope called me last week to say she'd been in touch with the Roman Catholic bishop, and also we have a relationship already with the Lutheran bishop, Tim Smith, and trying to get us all four together to begin to talk about how we can work collectively, collaboratively. So it's not just out in the congregation, it's also up to the diocese, to the bishop, to engage in collaboration and to model that. That's enough from me, but thank you. I've enjoyed.
This guy needs no introduction.
I'm a little bit nervous. I'm scheduled to preach here in 2 Sundays, so I don't want to negatively affect attendance that day. This is the 3rd time in about 10 days that I've been last in the series of speakers we've given today. And I'm not sure if there's a single word in my notes that has not already been said. So buckle in. A couple of us commented over dinner that this was, in advance at least, feeling a little bit like the walkabouts we've all been on, when the dioceses that called us to be bishops were wondering if they should call us or someone else, where we'd all stand before a church full of people and speak and then handle questions. I think the work that we've done together, even in the short time that we've all been bishops together, had led me to understand that there are going to be variations on a theme with this group of 3, and certainly if she'd been able to be with us, Anne would have added more to that. It's not that there are radical differences between us, but because of who we are as individuals and because of the distinct contexts in which we serve, there will be shades of the same kind of story. And Anne, if she was here, would probably want us to remember that she's the senior of the 4 of us. Anne was ordained before any of the 3 of us were ordained as bishops. So there's a single biblical verse that for me has been floating around as I have been getting ready for my time with you tonight. And it's a single verse from the 11th chapter of Hebrews. Now, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. I'm not going to spend a lot of time preaching or teaching, but for me, the idea of faith and the idea of hope go together pretty closely. The first idea I wanted to share with you that for me is a sign of hope is rooted in the leadership we have from our presiding bishop, who preaches the good news of Jesus whenever he's given the chance. And sometimes even when he may not actually. And have you all captured his pattern? He'll go and he'll preach, and just when you think maybe he's ready to finish, he'll say he's almost done, which is a way to catch his wind and go again. But I think that his preaching has given us more permission than we may have had in a long time to say the name of Jesus. I think that he's allowed us to become more confident in speaking out loud of our faith, even though we may do that in ways that are quite different from one another. So I think that his focus on Jesus at the center of our life as human beings, as followers of Jesus, and at the center of our life as church, has also brought with it, therefore, a real focus on the importance of the ministry of reconciliation. And I would argue that probably every time in our history there's been a need for reconciliation, but there certainly is now. I don't know how many times I'm with folks who express disappointment when the church seems to be about win-lose votes. Because whenever we vote on something, it would seem as if somebody wins and somebody loses, and whichever the side of that you're on, you're left feeling something less. I think he really focuses on the important work of reconciliation that we're called to do as a ministry that Jesus gives us. And for him, that certainly includes, but is not limited to, racial reconciliation. I think that with him, the House of Bishops has focused differently than we've been told it would once have focused on our strength and unity in diversity, rather than a group that's fractured into winners and losers with polarizations that we can see in the world around us. And I don't think we're called to follow the example of the world. I think that in Christ we're given another example, and so I'm grateful, and I see great signs of hope in our presiding bishop's call to be followers of Jesus. It's not new. We've been called to that for a long, long time. But have we always been confident to speak of our own faith in Christ? Or have we felt, maybe as Episcopal Christians, a little bit insecure to do that? I won't ask for a show of hands, but I could tell you stories of the times when Christians from other traditions have made clear to me what they think about Episcopal Christians. Let me put that differently. Episcopalians. Maybe not Christians. And you know, we could do the same kind of thing to other people. But I think that for us to understand that we're called as followers of Jesus to build bridges, to build relationships, to work at reconciliation. For me, that's a sign of hope for our church. We haven't got it down perfectly. We've got a long ways to go. But I think it might be more on our consciousness and more on our agendas than it may have been for a while. Building relationships, new life in Christ, but with space for a variety of expressions. We don't all have to walk the same way. We don't all have to speak the same way. We can be who we are in Christ and give thanks that others express their faith in ways that are different from us. So I think Jesus, and the emphasis on Jesus as the center of our faith and the one whom we follow. So guess what? I'm going to speak about younger members of the church as well. I think the first time I got myself into trouble at a diocesan meeting was when I was about halfway through high school, and I got up to challenge the bishop and the gathered assembly about a resolution that they were considering about abortion. Now, this was in Canada, and it was a long time ago. But I was suggesting, I think, as I reread the newspaper coverage of that event, that I was using, I might not have used the word hypocrisy, but I was certainly suggesting it. I'm grateful for the voice of our young people. And I'm grateful that in every new generation there are young people who have good things to say. And I think that in the same way that folks listened to me when I was younger, I would hope that we always listen to the young voices in our midst. And not sort of pat them on the shoulder and say, oh, that's nice. I was a little bit surprised when our diocesan youth ministry leader came to me a bunch of weeks ago, Emily Gowdy-Kennedy, to see if I thought it would be okay if some of our young people traveled to D.C. for the March of their lives. And I said, what do you mean, am I okay with it? I wish I could go. Sandy and I had already booked a vacation that took us to Florida. And so I think we had a half a dozen or 8 young people that went with the appropriate adult supervision. And I watched as the comments that were published in places like Facebook took sides about whether they had their heads on their shoulders or not, whether they understood the issues or not. Sandy and I marched in St. Petersburg in Florida because that's close to where we were. And with the permission of the bishop in that diocese, I wore a purple shirt so I was identifiable. Not one single person spoke to me about what that shirt was or what it meant. I found out afterwards there were Episcopalians there, but I guess, anyway, what I found interesting with Sandy is to hear the young people speak powerfully and well, and to watch the adults get up and campaign for office. To listen to the young people speak with creative terms and in poetry and with music, and then to get out of the streets and march and listen to all the political jargon that started to ring out of the mouths of the adults who were marching with them. I think I'm disappointed, I guess, when we co-opt the voices of our young people or try to shut them down. Like every other generation, I would argue our young people today should not be stereotyped. They don't all think the same way. I was always reminded as a parish priest that some of them actually love classical music. They would remind me that when I got my guitar out. We ought not to dismiss their concerns or questions, but really engage in a relationship with them. try to hear them and understand them, because what's the best way to shut another person down? Don't listen to them. Disregard them. This weekend was a pretty powerful experience at St. Andrew's Church in Nag's Head. About 150 people gathered for the Acolyte Festival that St. Andrew's hosts year by year. And this year we were kind of pleased to watch as carloads and busloads of people came from the Diocese of Western North Carolina. That's a long trip. And we had some from the Diocese of Southern Virginia. And when we posed the group picture, which you can see on my Facebook page as my cover shot if you want to look, you have to zoom in a little bit because everybody's so small in the big picture. But when you zoom in a little bit, you might see that acolytes of color were in equal numbers to acolytes with white skin. We had a large group come from La Capilla de Santa Maria in the Diocese of Western North Carolina, which left our kids from San Pedro's in Washington thrilled. Because now there were two groups of young people and adults who could speak English but also Spanish with one another. There were just more people of color, a full range of colors. That's something I guess I see with young people more than I see in our churches. And the assumptions of those groups of people are different than the assumptions we make sometimes as adults. So let me connect that to a slightly older group of young people. Somewhere along the line, we realized that our camp staff, Trinity Center and Sound to Sea, were leaders in our diocese. They were staff in our diocese, and like the rest of us, they ought to participate in the kind of training that's offered by what we used to call our anti-racism group, which we now call our racial reconciliation team. And what was really interesting to hear afterwards in the reviews is that some of the young people pushed back hard. They say, why do we have to talk about civil rights era issues and not Ferguson? Why are we only talking about black and white and not also all of the other varieties of race and gender and sexuality around which there are the same kinds of differences and tensions? They were asking different questions, and they pushed the leaders of our diocesan ministry, I think this was a big part of it, to go back to their drawing board and work at how to offer some of that ministry differently. Now they're using the language of dialogue for the training. It's just a word. They're inviting people to come together, and I have to think that the influence of our young adults was an important part of the feedback they had. The last piece on that one, I'm grateful that in our diocese, and I'm sure it's true in other dioceses, I know it is across the country, we continue to have bright, enthusiastic young people in seminaries and coming for ordination. And I'm hopeful, and I see signs of this. I saw signs of this in this deanery last fall, that sometimes we make space for those who are new and younger ordinands to take leadership roles. For those of you who aren't aware of it, we had a deanery event last fall, and I think there's one being planned again. And besides the outreach and service projects we had in the community, we gathered for worship. And the younger priests, I think all of whom were assistant clergy, were given the responsibility of planning the liturgy. It was great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Some of them are here tonight. I just am so grateful. And I think this is a generational thing. Is it a sign of hope that's different than the kinds of signs of hope we could have seen in every generation? Maybe not. But what was the church like when you were a teenager? How were you welcomed? How were you incorporated? How is the world different now? Some of us have even begun a conversation about the possibility of creating a space for a group of young adults to come together in an intentional community. A community that would be about vocation and calling and discernment, with prayer at the center, with work and other things around. We've had a couple of meetings now, and I think we left the last one kind of excited. St. Francis can be a great example for us. Besides having some interest in birds and things, he was also a young person who changed the church, through whom God worked to change the church. And I think Francis would be an example of people who've done that in every generation. Different language perhaps, but I see signs of hope in the church around combating isolationism. I don't know if that's a word that has a definition. But there are lots of places where, in the eastern part of the state at least, we seem to take pride in the idea of being rugged individuals who each ought to operate in isolation from our neighboring congregations. Now I get that. I've been watching that happen in the life of the church for as long as I've been able to watch the church. But I heard pretty clearly that that was an issue for us. We're doing some simple things that people are finding helpful. I would love to lay down my Facebook page and retire it for all time, and maybe the politics of Facebook will require that soon. But I continue to hear stories from people across the diocese about the stories and pictures I post as I travel around the diocese, because it helps folks connect with places where they once lived or places where they once worshiped, or to get a better, wider, fuller picture of who we are as church besides the place where they live and worship. I'm hearing that same kind of story about our use of simple technology that the world has had at its disposal for a long time, where you can actually sit in front of a computer and see the face of another person and speak with them. Y'all realize we're Facebook Live tonight? Say hello. Which means that for a diocese that spans 5 to 6 hours of driving from north to south,
5 hours and 46 minutes.
we all do the driving. With that kind of stretch, it's hard to get people together for meetings sometimes. Now, sometimes we have to be face-to-face, but you know how nice it is to spend 45 minutes in a conversation with one another and not spend 2.5 hours getting there and back to the meeting? We did something brutal during Holy Week, and I think it's because in diocesan offices, sometimes we forget about Holy Week. I know Ron was put up to this. We had 2 significant meetings in our office during Holy Week, which called clergy and lay people together with long drives before and after meetings. I don't know if we can promise we'll never do that again, but using some new technology to help connect folks over a great distance. It's been around for a long time. How do we maximize that impact? How do we work better at connecting folks with the rest of the church so that we can use the gifts God's given us, sometimes gifts that are spread around, in ways that can be more effective? Our Constitution and canons are still written as if the only way a meeting can happen is when people are in the same room with each other. So I think some of the technology that we're using is technology that can help us in bringing people together across a vast expanse of space in congregations that might often operate in isolation. We, like other dioceses, are working to try and find best practice around collaborative ministry. I won't get into the details of how we're doing this, but we are finding congregations coming together to share the strength of clergy leadership, to share the strength of lay leadership. I fully believe that God gives to the church everything the church needs to do the work of ministry that God gives us to do. But it might not all of those gifts might not be given to us in the limited boxes that we're used to considering. How might we find access to resources in our relationships with one another? So I think those are some of the ways that we need to combat the isolation. We're hearing results from even places like Convention of people feeling better connected. That's hard to measure. We've got lots of stories of life in the past in East Carolina, that things that worked, things that didn't. Don't want to just always reinvent, but sometimes there have been things that worked well. We are redeveloping our school for ministry, which I think has come and gone over the years. It most recently re-emerged a few years back as a school for forming deacons locally. We've added a gentle piece. One of you here is a part of it, where folks who have a seminary education from somewhere else are being supported in the formation towards ordination. Because ordination ought to include both discernment and academic and spiritual formation. We're moving far more slowly than I can bear most of the time. But I really believe that as bishop, I'm not called to make it up as I go. And every once in a while, the leaders of our diocese pull me aside and say, Bishop, could you show us how you got from this decision to that one? And we need to slow down a little bit sometimes, because I may be a little bit more willing than I ought to be to leap ahead past some long-held and beloved traditions. We hope to further develop the School of Ministry so we have a strong track offering the possibility of local formation in relationship with our seminaries for those who aren't able to go for a traditional 3-year seminary education. We're hoping as well to build and strengthen our capacity of formation for lay leaders in our church, both for licensed ministries and for all of the things which our lay people, you all, provide in leadership and ministry in our congregations. Not that we're trying to take the role of a parish, but we're trying to supplement the work of a parish, the work of parishes, in offering some of those resources, bringing together good leaders from the church to share good practice. We do have a couple of good stories of new life. We have a little congregation meeting in a building which was officially closed by convention a few years back, and that's St. Mark's Church in Hodges-Copple. We closed it, but we hadn't yet sold it. There is now a group of people meeting faithfully in that church at least once a month, if not twice a month, typically on a Saturday afternoon, typically with evening prayer, typically with a meal afterwards. They've restored the building. There's a whole crew of churches coming together at the end of this month, next weekend I guess, to paint, to clean it up. There are congregations and clergy in the area who are coming together to provide the support they need, and we're trying to let it grow in its own time to see if this will again be a congregation. Guess who's leading the work? People younger than me. I don't want to say that's young necessarily. We are launching this summer for the first time in a good number of years a summer ministry at Hatteras, where there are lots of people in the summer. And we've engaged 2 seminarians from Virginia Theological Seminary to come for training as part of their education. We have resources to support seminarians from Virginia. Get that word out if you want. And so they're going to be with us to help us explore the possibilities. Whether that becomes a church plant or a summer chaplaincy, we don't know yet. But St. Andrew's Mag's Head recently celebrated the 100th anniversary of when it was first in the building, or first was meeting on people's front porches in the summer. Because I think Episcopalians and others make it to the beach in the summer. There's other ways I could talk about creative clustering, but I'll leave that. The last piece is really the most fragile of the hopes that I see, but I think I'm seeing it. And it's a move towards what I would call partnerships over charity. I think we have a tradition as a church of writing checks and letting others do the hard work. I would hate for us to stop writing checks and do nothing, but in a parish where I served, we always tried to write checks only to those places where we were going with our feet in our hands and where we were building relationships. I could tell you more stories about that, but certainly after Hurricane Matthew, there have been some gentle signs of partnering where funds raised by the members of the diocese were given out to congregations and their members to work in partnership with others in the community where there was devastation. And some of that work is still happening. I think there's a new day coming in the work of the Episcopal Farm Workers Ministry, and Sam and I, working with our various representatives, are about that work. I think that for a long time, the people of this diocese and of the Diocese of North Carolina, including many of you, have been very generous in supporting people who are served through that ministry. But there's a lot of folks who actively support that ministry who are citizens and who have businesses and for whom Spanish may have been a first language, but they're well established, and we ought to be working in partnerships with one another and not just holding on to the idea of that kind of charity, which has been a more traditional hallmark of the way we do mission. That one's a bit of a challenge, and I'd love to hear more and more stories of how that works, how we go alongside people and form relationships, transform our own identity, work at reconciliation, and engage in changing the world and making it more and more that kind of beloved community that somebody spoke of even before Bishop José A.
I have a bit after 8, and this has been a wonderful conversation. I wonder if I can indulge us for a few more moments just to invite the 3 of you to reflect on what you've heard from each other. If there's anything that you would like to add or any themes that you see in collaboration, and we'll do that for a few minutes, and then we'll call it a night. How's that sound? Are there any?
I'm actually.
I'd love to hear their questions.
Okay. Yeah. You guys okay with some questions? We're going to try to talk too much. Talk too much. Okay. There you go. Rector, you got some questions? Got lots of questions. Okay. In the basket. Oh, who wants to pick a question? Jose, you want to pick a question?
This is like a walkabout, I'm telling you.
Yeah. guidance would you give to our church regarding safety initiatives we might consider implementing?
Now that's my area.
Yeah.
I've been having this conversation in the diocese for obvious reasons. One, it's been raised, but two, because I was a law enforcement officer. So people have come to me to talk about it and my views. I will tell you, just matter of fact, our response in Western North Carolina is not going to be to put guns in the church. The answer to guns is not more guns. And I'm going to make it very simple. We're moving in Western North Carolina. I had this conversation. I'm about to give an email out to all our congregations and our leadership on areas of safety that they need to consider, and also some various resources that I'm going to happily share with my brothers here that we've spent considerable time on that are specifically dealing with church communities and providing guidance. One of the first things I tell churches is that you need to contact your local law enforcement agency. They are prepared to come into churches and actually walk your physical plan and give you analysis and do your security assessment, look at all the different ways in which you are. And then there's also materials which I'm happy to share that we're going to be providing that talk about the kind of training you can do for ushers and others to be aware and attentive. Here's the challenge, and I'm just going to say it real briefly. If you read any study on shootings involving law enforcement officers, and I had a classmate of mine from Police County that actually was involved in a shooting, which is very rare. Many law enforcement officers go with never discharging their weapon in the line of duty. I came close once, and thanks be to God I didn't have to pull the trigger. But here's the thing. On all those shootings, in about 95 to 96% of those shootings, the shootings happen in a span or in a distance of 16 feet or less. And in that span, when they talk to the officer after the fact and they debrief, they say, how many shots did you fire? And usually the officer says 3, 4. They usually shoot between 12 and 14. And in those 12 or 14, maybe 3 make contact. And these are people that when we train all the time on these weapons. We don't train to maim, we didn't train to hurt, we train to kill. And so, imagine if we start putting that in the hands of people who simply just had a permit to carry. What else would we do? And quite frankly, church isn't the place to bring in guns, in my opinion. And so, part of it is, and the other part I ask people is, as a law enforcement officer, we were asked, could you take the life of somebody else? That's not a question most people can answer or want to answer. And I don't think we should put them in that position. And so there's a lot of things we can do, but putting guns in the church is just not one of them. And so I'm happy to share what we have, but I think the things you can do is just simply be aware of your surroundings, talk to the law enforcement officers, and then build your plan as far as with your lay volunteers about how to monitor people coming in and out of the church. We won't get into the theological. I'll be here all night.
Okay, this one's fun. These are politically charged times. Does the Episcopal Church have a view of today's politics, and which of today's political issues does the church take a stand on?
You all get to hear me more often than you get to hear these two, so I don't want to take too much time. Well, I think the answer is yes. I have the good fortune of traveling across a vast expanse of space and people and geography in which I meet Episcopalians who are Republican and Episcopalians that are Democrat and Episcopalians who might be independent, who hold very different positions from one another, and yet they can still worship together. And I don't know, and this is getting more personal, that we ought to have a single set of political positions. I think that we need to be respectful of the issues we face, and Jesus did not back away from difficult issues. But to suggest that we're going to have a clean policy on every tough issue is to go back to the thing I said when I spoke about dividing people into winners and losers. So I really think that there's always room for dialogue, there's always room for respect. There is usually room for a great variety of positions, but I don't know that these two have watched me, but my body gets tight and sore when the House of Bishops decides it's going to make another statement on something. The last time we were together in March, we started with a statement that was going to take on the NRA. And there were a whole lot of us that were struggling with whether we could or couldn't support it. And thank God we were in a community that prayed together. And by the time it actually came to us for our consideration, a difficult thing had been spoken to us. The bishop of the Diocese of Southeast Florida read to us a letter from the parents of one of the young women killed in Parkland. So grateful for the care of the clergy and the bishop of that diocese, and asking us for our prayers. And we prayed. And by the time we came back with a statement, I think it was, footnotes aside, I think it was a statement that could be accepted and adopted and challenging for all people. So the answer is yes.
We're going to try this as an experiment. I'm going to ask you each for a tweet, okay? And what it is just to get in as succinct a way as you can say, the question is the biggest challenge and the biggest blessing of your diocese. So, in just a few words, what's the blessing? Yeah, you're on site.
80 characters now.
What's the biggest blessing and what's the biggest challenge? And I'm counting syllables.
Yep, so the biggest blessing is easy. The Sunday visits. I love being in every congregation that I visited, and each one is different. It's unique. It's got its own character, its own history, its own personality, its own quirks, and its own deep faithfulness. And I love being in conversation with people, getting to know them getting to know me, finding out what our journey has been, how God has brought us together at this time, listening to the ways that Jesus has transformed our lives, first in different places, and then bringing us together in this time, in this place. So I know you want succinct. So
that was a long tweet.
Yeah. Oh, this was supposed to be a tweet. Sorry. Okay. Challenge. I'll try and be more succinct. The biggest challenge for me right now in the diocese is to follow Michael Curry.
You guys want to do a challenge or a blessing, or are we going to let it be?
Biggest blessing, the people.
Okay. Biggest challenge?
The biggest challenge is sometimes the people. The biggest challenge is institutionalism.
Rob, you want to?
Sure, besides people, I'll say hospitality. I wish that everybody else who entered our churches was treated with as much hospitality as I experienced. Biggest challenge, too many people believe in the doctrine of scarcity. God's goodness and abundance, we don't even understand.
Thank you. Okay, I actually imagine this is one that you could each answer. As you know, there are over 10 million undocumented workers, including 700,000 dreamers in the USA, who now live in fear of arrest and deportation. Some people have said this is the human rights issue of our time. What should the Christian, Episcopal Church do to meet this crisis if the arrests continue to mount?
We have an obligation to love and serve our neighbor and respect the dignity of every human being, period. Amen. This is an issue I'm very passionate about. I am the son of a Cuban refugee. I have seen firsthand what people will do to those who come from other countries and how they're treated. This isn't partisan politics, folks. Sorry to break it to you. The reality is as I spoke in the Diocese of Atlanta about immigration, somebody stood up and said, Bishop, are you saying that we should defy the law? I'm saying, no, we should fight for access to the law. And I wish I could tell you from Western North Carolina, where I've had now one parishioner arrested by ICE this past weekend, and I've got a church where the parishioners are not coming to worship because they're afraid, and they're in their homes. This is a real concern and a real fear. And my fear is that we've got amazing young people who were born in this country, and the notion that we think it's a Christian-like response to send their parents and leave them on their own is abhorrent. And I think we can disagree about what it could look like and what it should look like, but I think we have got to stop putting the Mexican as the poster child for illegal activity, and we have got to stop putting our broken system on the backs of the immigrant.
I would echo everything that Jose said, and just underscore that our voices as leaders, and I mean that not just as bishops, as every person in the church, we need to make our voices heard on this, make our solidarity clear, make it clear that we understand that we stand with these folks. And they need to hear that from us, but also the organization, the institution, the government that is pressuring them needs to understand that we stand with them.
Loving our neighbor, to me, is without limits. I heard Bishop Rob at Atlanta in a video that was published widely say that our primary work is our primary work is pastoral, not political. And that if we actually care for our neighbors and love our neighbors, the practical stuff gets worked out. Dina, I'm looking at you. Has that workshop happened yet, or is this coming Sunday?
It's April 29th at 1 p.m.
Is that a Sunday?
Yep. Yeah, it's
So
next
April
Sunday.
29th at 1 p.m. at St. Paul's, which is a time others of you could get to. Our diocese minister for Spanish language ministry is working with some folks from here in Wilmington to help those who are interested in doing the legal work that would allow parents to arrange for how their children would be cared for should the parents be taken. And you know, I did that for my kids. I've got powers of attorney for my kids. I bet most of us have done that over time. It's hard, if not impossible, to get proper power of attorney if you're not a citizen of this country. So that's the first of the workshops we're doing. I try to constantly keep up with the folks in our diocese who are closest to the ground in this. And I find it interesting to listen in on some of the conversations that good people of Eastern North Carolina have, not realizing that when I stand with them, there's an immigrant in their midst.
One thing I think it's important for us as bishops to also share with you that I think is a common misconception and is used as a political weapon when it comes to the issues of refugees. I think it's important that you know that Episcopal Migration Ministries is one of the 12 arms that works on behalf of the United States government to resettle refugees in this country. 95% of the salary that goes to the Episcopal Migration Ministries comes from the State Department. And so it's often politicized as we're a bunch of do-gooders who are defying the law. We are the arm, one of 12 arms of the State Department resettling refugees. And we have let this fear tactic kick in to say that somehow we're a bunch of rogue people. We are one of 12 officially authorized to do this on behalf of the State Department. And so if you look at the numbers of the Syrian refugees alone in 3 years, we have gone from over 24,000 to 11,000, and so far in 2018, only 11 Syrian families have been resettled in the United States. So I just want you to know that when you hear about these groups like the Lutheran ministries, these are all arms that are doing this on behalf of the United States Department of State. So it's an important thing to know.
So you both know, I think, that the Episcopal Migration Ministries has a site in New Bern.
Yes.
You might not realize there's a satellite here in Wilmington that's essentially closed down now.
Good. Well, thank you all. I want to thank you all. A round of applause for when my kids were little and we would eat dinner and then forget to say grace, sometimes we would say what we call informed grace, which came at the end of the meal. So we would say thanks for what we'd received. So on page 818, there's a prayer for the election of a bishop. and that is forward-looking. But I want to shift it a little bit, so just read it along with me. Read it along silently as I change some of the tense, but to give thanks for these three characters who've deigned to convene and join us, and who will spend tomorrow in collaboration talking with each other about how the ministries that they have started in their rather young tenures can unfold for the good of not only North Carolina, but the wider church. Let us pray. Almighty God, you're a giver of every good gift. We thank you that you have looked so graciously on your church, and you have so guided the minds of those who in each of these dioceses have chosen a bishop. We thank you that we have been blessed with abundance to receive faithful pastors who are so ably caring for your people, and who are so clearly equipping us for our ministries through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Let's sing Praise God from